Welcome back, everybody. We are ready to move on to the heel flap and heel turn of our sock. This is a continuation of our knitting tutorial series, Learning How to Knit Socks, teaching Gerald, my good friend, how to make his very first pair of socks. And there's quite a few of you along for the ride. So thank you for joining us today. The rest of the series of these videos can be found on my channel, Off the Grid Needlearts, and there is a separate Learn to Knit playlist that you can find under the playlist heading on my channel. So we are ready to go. As you can see, I have both of my socks. My cuff and my legs are finished. I have one of my socks is knit on DPNs, and my other sock is knit on a small 9-inch circular. The way that I like to knit my socks up until this point has been rather willy-nilly. I'm a bit of a fly by the seat of my pants knitter. I've always ascribed to the if it doesn't fit me, surely it will fit someone else, which is great when it's just for yourself, but when you're trying to teach someone else what to do, or learn the proper method in order to impart that knowledge onto someone else, sometimes it's a little more important that we try to follow the rules. So in order to remember what I've done, I followed a piece of advice that a couple of knitting friends of mine also follow when they knit socks, and that is they count their rows. There are lots of different ways that people make socks or measure how they make their socks. Some people knit 2 at a time on really long circular needles. That's a method called the magic loop method. You can knit 1 sock at a time with magic loop. You can even knit 2 socks at a time with magic loop. I've done magic loop before. It's not my preferred method of knitting, and that's the only reason why I'm not sharing it with you on this channel. There are lots of other videos out there that do a great job of teaching the magic loop method of knitting. And if either of these methods that we've been talking about in this tutorial series, if neither of them are really working well for you, then that might be something that you can try. So I have counted rows. I have done 20 rows of rib for my cuff, and I have done 60 rows of stockinette for my leg. This is a length that I like, and then I don't have to worry about measuring it. I just count the rows. Counting rows is really easy to do. I like to get a really pointy instrument, and it so happens that we have one handy. And then if you look closely at your knitting, you can see that the knit stitch makes a V. So it depends on which way you're looking at it. So I guess if you're looking at it like this, there's your V right there. And so you just simply go up the V's and you count each V is 1 row. And then that gives you a pretty accurate number of rows. So I have 60 rows of leg on each of my sock. Now, like you, I'm going to be learning something new with my sock tutorials as well. My preferred method of knitting socks up until this point has been to knit the entire sock on a small 9-inch circular, and then I would switch to the DPNs, to the double pointed needles for the heel and heel flap, the heel flap, the heel turn, and the gusset. And then I would return to the small circular for the rest of the foot, switching back to DPNs for the toe. For this tutorial, I'm going to learn how to do my entire heel on a 9-inch circular needle. My double pointed needle I will do as usual with the DPNs. So let's get started. Today we're going to be talking about the heel flap and the heel turn. Obviously, I'm not going to be able to complete my heel flap to show you the heel turn today, but I've had a careful look at Louise's instructions, and everything that is in there, these are all terms that we've discussed before, and I feel fairly confident that you should be able to continue on yourself. The next lesson, so next Tuesday's tutorial, will help with the gusset, and I know that that's usually a bit of a scary thing for new sock knitters when they're learning how to pick up stitches and create that gusset, those gusset decreases, and then, you know, making their way down the foot. So we'll take our time with the gusset next week. So for our first step for the heel flap, we're going to start with the DPN sock. As you may see, I'm not sure you can notice, but the one difference that I've always noticed about my socks on DPNs versus knitting with a small circular, you can see a very faint line down the sock where the join is between the DPNs. So where I changed needle, you're going to see a little line down the row of your sock. And if I open this up, you can see that that's consistent on all four sides. So there's my line from that needle join and my line on this side from the needle join. This is nothing to be concerned about. If you see when I stretch it open, there is a little bit of a little teeny tiny gap that runs its way down there. But once this sock is washed and worn, and you could even wash it and block it properly, those little lines will mostly disappear and you'll never notice them. So that obviously, because we're knitting on the circular just round and round, those lines don't appear on this sock here. Okay, so when we start our heel flap, we need to get down to 3 needles on the DPNs instead of, you know, having that extra needle. We don't need it. So we're going to get rid of our 5th needle. We're going to open up our sock so that we can have a good look at where our needles are sitting. Oops, I'm stuck there. There we go. And now I can see clearly where I am. Here's the end of my yarn. And I know that this was the end of my round because it matches up to where my cast on thread is at the bottom of my sock. And that's why I never sew in my end at the beginning of my sock, because to me that's my marker of where my round starts. So I know that I've done a complete round by the time my working yarn matches up with my tail at the cuff of my sock. So the end of the working yarn, when you've completed a round, this is going to be needle 4. So your working yarn is still attached to needle 4. The very next needle is number 1. So this is needle 1, needle 1, needle 2, needle 3, and needle 4. So basically when we work the heel flap, we are going to be using the stitches that are on needles 4 and needle 1. Needle 2 and 3, this is the top of your foot. So those stitches are going to stay live on the needles. But what we need to do is we need to combine needle 4 and needle 1. So what we do, we simply take needle 4 and needle 1, and we're going to knit those stitches from needle 1 right over onto needle 4, so that half of our stitches are ready to be worked for the heel flap. So let's just take care of that right now. Lots of noise and activity happening around me today here. It's a busy day here in London, Ontario. School bells ringing. So whatever number of stitches you have for the size of your sock, half of them will become your heel, and the front half will become the front of your foot. So now I'm on to 3 needles. Like that. Now, where my working yarn is, I still need that 4th needle because this is the one you're going to use to knit back and forth. Everything that happens from here on in with regards to the heel flap and heel turn all take place on this one needle. Needles 2 and 3 simply hang out for the ride. You don't have to do anything with them. They just stay there. So what we do is we need to turn our work. So we simply do exactly what it says. We turn our work around so that it's facing us. And now you can see that our working yarn is on the right side as if we were about to knit flat, which we are. We need to do some slip stitches for this particular heel flap. When we slip our stitches for this heel flap, we will be slipping them purlwise. So what that means is you slide your needle in as if to purl the stitch so it comes to the front of the needle, and you slip the stitch off without knitting it. And that's all the slip stitch is. And what that does, those slipped stitches along both of our edges provide a really clear guide map for us to later on use those slipped stitches to pick up and knit our stitches when we need to create our gusset. So then the next direction has us purling all the way back across our row. And I think by now you all know how to purl and you all know what you're doing. So I'm going to carry on and I'm going to purl my way across this row, but I might speed the video up a little bit just to get us back to the other side. So I'll see you in a minute. There we have it. I've made it all the way to the other end of my row. Turn your work around so that we can then work backwards the other way. So here's where the slip stitch part of the slipped heel comes into play. This is the row, the second row of our pattern. So RS for right side. Our directions tell us to slip one, knit one, all the way across the row, saying that we will end with a knit stitch. So just like with the row before, with the purl row, we still slip that first stitch purlwise. So you just slip it right off and you don't do anything with it except keep it looking like a knit stitch, not all loosey-goosey. You still want it nice and not tight, but to the needle, not loose. Next stitch is knit. Slip, knit, slip, knit, all the way across your row. And that's it. You will carry on doing that for 2.5 more inches. Mine works out to about 20 rows. I usually check my measurements after, but I know that after I've done about 20 rows of my heel flap, so 10 purl rows and 10 slip stitch rows, I know that generally my heel flap is about the size that it needs to be. So there you have it. There's our DPN heel flap underway. So I'm going to put this down and I'm going to get started showing you now with my circular needle. Now this is the first time I'm doing a heel flap on a circular needle, so bear with me. I even have an extra stitch marker ready to go because I think it's going to just be that little bit of extra help that I need. Now because I'm knitting 2 at a time, I'm taking the yarn for my second sock from the outside of my ball, so I'm just getting a bit of extra yarn there so that I'm ready to go. So I knit to the end of my round on my circular needle. I know that I have 60 rounds all the way up and I'm ready to start my heel flap. On my DPNs, I used needle 4 and needle 1 added together to create my half of my stitches. And I like to have that tail from my cast on to remind me where my starting point was. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to count back the number of stitches that should be on needle 4. I'm doing a 68 stitch sock, so evenly divided there should be 17 stitches on each needle. So I'm going to count back 17, and that will be the equivalent to my needle 4. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 17. So 17 is there, and I'm going to use a stitch marker or progress keeper. Just going to place that in there. Just placed my stitch marker or my progress keeper where it would be. I'm going to double check that count just to be sure. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 17. There's 17 stitches. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to knit the next 17 stitches. That would be the equivalent of needle 1. I'm going to double check that I have 34 stitches here. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 22, 24, 26, 28, 32, 34. 34 stitches, I am ready to go. So I'm going to place a stitch marker to mark for now until I get a little further on when it becomes really clear where the end of my row is, and that takes a bit of the guesswork out. And then I'm going to carry on and do exactly the same thing that I did with my DPNs. So I'm going to follow the directions as if I were knitting on my DPNs. Slip that first stitch and purl all the way back to my marker, which will be my 34 stitches. Once I get all the way around to my marker, I will flip my work over. I will slip that first stitch, and then I will do knit, slip, all the way back to my marker, following the exact same pattern that I just did for my DPN sock. Just making it work for me on a circular needle. Looking ahead to the directions for the heel turn, the only other instructions that are in there are an SSK, which is the slip, slip, knit. That can be a little trickier on tiny little needles. They have a tendency to slip easily off the needle if you're not careful. Please take your time. When you're just learning how to do something new, take your time, go slow, there's no rush. But just in case, I'm going to be uploading 2 extra little videos today that Louise Patterson, the designer of our super simple pattern, our super simple cuff down sock pattern, that she recorded last night just for a little extra help. One of them is how to pick up a knit stitch. The other one is how to pick up a dropped purl stitch, just in case. Put in a lifeline. If you don't remember what that is, we talked about this back when we learned how to knit our hat. When we learned our dishcloth right from the beginning. Putting in a lifeline, take a needle and some dental floss before you start your heel and sew that lifeline in through every stitch. So then it creates a little bit of a exactly what it sounds like, a lifeline, in case everything goes south and you cannot fix it. You can't use the help in order to pick up a drop stitch. Nothing is working. It looks awful and you're so frustrated. All you have to do is take your needles out, gently remove the yarn until you get back to that lifeline, and then very slowly and carefully re-pick up those stitches with your needles that are being held on the lifeline. A really great thing to use as a lifeline when you're knitting socks is dental floss. So just thread a needle with a nice long length of dental floss and do yourself a favor before you start your heel, sew in a lifeline. It really is a good idea when you're first learning. So that's it. So we've got our slip slip knit and we've got a purl two together. That's the P2 tog. Purl two together is exactly like what it sounds like. You simply are going to purl two stitches together. You're going to take your needle and you're going to slide it through the front. And again, with two needles, with tiny needles, it's a little bit trickier. But that's it. You're going to purl those two stitches together, just like that. Easy peasy. Okay, that's it for me today. Any problems, hop on over to our Facebook group. I will provide a link in the drop-down box below. Any questions, any problems, post a picture and share with us what's going on and we can try to help. We will be recording a short video together to Louise and I to put up next week to deal with our gusset. Good luck, everybody. I hope you are loving your socks. I hope you're having a lot of fun. And even if it's providing a challenge for you that maybe is a little more of a challenge than you had hoped for, I still hope that you will persevere and just practice and don't worry about mistakes. Just try again. Good luck. Happy knitting.